Welcome to the Dive at Big Creek Baptist Church, where we dive a little bit deeper into doctrine and theology. I'm William Moore, the lead pastor of the church here at Big Creek, and today we are talking about sin as selfishness. So this series called The Fall that we've been doing these past few weeks, each week we're taking a part of sin so we can fully understand what it is. You know, if you've been in the church long, or maybe even out just in the world, you maybe have heard the word sin before, and you kind of have a rough idea of what the idea is. But this series is designed to help us to have a broader understanding of sin, not just as an intellectual matter, but so we can understand in our own life what our rebellion and what our sin looks like. And so today we're talking about sin as selfishness. When we sin, we are acting out of a selfish attitude and mindset that assumes our actions will lead us to more happiness than if we obeyed God. And so what essentially sin is, we talked about it as transgression, we've talked about it as rebellion, but a part of sin, sort of the heart motivation, is to say, I believe that God has a standard, but that the way that I think life should be lived will lead to more satisfaction for me than God's standard. And so part of sin is that heart motive. It's saying, I believe if I do this thing that I want to do, opposed to doing the thing that God wants me to do, I'm going to have more happiness and contentment in life. And why that is selfish is this, because it's saying what is most important in my life is contentment and happiness, even though God has other things that are priorities for Him, including our contentment, but ultimately His glorification, which He has full right to ask for because He's made us, and it's good for us as it turns out. His elevation and His exaltation, which again, He made us so He can ask us to take part in that, and on top of that, it's good for us, and if we seek to obey Him and seek to exalt Him, it actually leads to a life of contentment and satisfaction. Why sin is selfish is to say, you know, God, I know you've made me for a certain purpose. I know the main priority in this life is to know you and to make you known. But instead of all that, I just want to chase my own happiness and my own satisfaction, which ultimately sin never really leads to. Obeying you does, but I think it does, so I'm going to do that instead. And that's why sin is selfish. Because sin is manifested in our tendency to be curved inward or to be inward focused, so where we don't even really think about what God wants, we more or less just think about what we want towards ourselves. It is opposed or opposite of love, opposed to or opposite of love. And why is that? Well, because love is sacrificial. Love is saying, I'm going to do what's best for you in order to point you to Christ's commands. That's how I used to define love when I taught youth ministry to students. I would say, you know, because they have all kinds of ideas about love. And I would say, here's essentially what love is. Love is obeying or pointing people to Christ by sacrificially, so giving to them, pointing them to Christ, pointing them to obey Christ's commands. And so that right there is essentially what it looks like to love somebody. It looks like sacrificially saying, I'm going to, irrespective of what it is that you prefer, or whether or not it's going to affect the way that you view me, or whether or not it's going to affect our relationship, I'm going to point you to Christ. I'm going to show you the way that you need to go. I'm going to sacrificially, whatever the cost may be, I'm going to sacrificially tell you the way that Christ has called you to live, tell you about Christ if you don't know Him, and tell you the way that He's called you to live. Why is that sacrificial? Because it's risky sometimes to tell people the way that Christ wants them to live. It's risky sometimes to point them to Jesus. It's risky sometimes to call people up to the commands of Christ. But we do it because we know that's what's best for them. We know that God has made them, and so He knows best how their life should be lived. And so we know it's what's best for them. It's opposite of loving when we only consider ourselves. So getting back to that scenario of loving a person, it's not loving to go, well, I don't want to tell them the truth because it's going to hurt their feelings and they're not going to like me. Or I don't want to tell them the truth because they're going to think I'm some kind of crazy Christian. I don't want to tell them the truth because it just takes too much time. That's self-focused. That's not loving. What's loving is to say, whatever the cost, however much time it takes, whether or not they think I'm a crazy Christian, I'm going to tell them the truth anyway because I know it's what's best for them. And so being sinful is opposite of being loving. It's being selfish. Love looks outwardly to place others before oneself, operating from the mindset that others are more important than we are. Others and their needs to know Christ and to walk with Christ and have a relationship with Him are more important than we are. And that includes Jesus. Being loving towards Christ is to say, I'm going to put Christ above myself because I believe that His desires and His will are more important than mine. And hopefully those things are in line, but up until the time maybe we know what His desires and will are, sometimes we just trust that His way is best. Philippians 2:3 speaks to this idea. It says this, do nothing from selfish ambition, so to get ahead, or conceit because you think you're better, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. So in humility, and sometimes that takes time. We are sometimes selfish, but when you settle down at an endpoint, make sure your endpoint is this: I'm going to put others before myself, and I'm going to love them whatever the price is. Where sin selfishly seeks personal gratification and happiness, love instead works for the joy of others in hopes of making others happy or content in God. And so we work to make other people or help other people to be content in God, and we do that by pointing them to God. That's what it means to love. It means to sacrificially point them to Christ's commands, to call them up to God's way of living. And so to be selfish is to be sinful, to say, and even, sometimes it's like not unreasonable things. Like, you think about selfishness, you think it means like, well, I've got all this, it's just been Halloween when this has been recorded. So selfishness might mean I'm going to keep all this candy for myself. And yeah, that is selfishness. But selfishness also is saying, I'm not going to risk someone thinking I'm weird or being mad at me because I'm going to tell them about Jesus, so I just won't tell them. Well, that's selfish. We're protecting ourself, we're protecting our self-image, or we're protecting the way that people see us or whatever. That's selfish, and that's sin. We are called to be risky, called to take chances, called to do the hard thing to get people to Jesus. And so, as you think about this idea of sin, you reflect on this in your own life. I pray that God uses this to call you into a more intimate relationship with Him. If you have questions about this topic or any others that we've discussed, please reach out to me. My email is wlawrencem@gmail.com. That's wlawrencem@gmail.com. You can pass on topic suggestions, questions you may have. I'd love to connect with you. For my folks here at Bend Creek, this is an intricate part of our discipleship process, so be sure to tune in each week to check out these videos, pass them along to others. And if you know somebody who maybe doesn't have access to the internet, doesn't have a smartphone or a computer, be sure to share this information with them. Let them know, hey, this is what William talked about in this week's dive. Keep them connected, help them to be connected with what we're talking about. And I just pray this is an encouragement to you, a blessing to you as you continue to seek to understand. We've talked about before, the dive is designed to be biblically accessible and clear for anybody who wants to get closer, intimate understanding of God. So I pray that this has been the case for you and continues to be as you tune in. And until next time, we will see you on the dive.